video is about why I hate new metal and why I've always hated new metal ever since it came out. So, first of all, what is new metal? Um, it's not new metal as in like you get a new pair of clothes or something like that or anything like that. It's actually when you spell it out, it's spelled N as in new and U as in Uranus. That's how it's spelled. So I don't remember when I first read about the term, but I believe it was probably like the late '90s. So there was a lot of stuff going around at that time. I mean, a lot of like information going around about metal being dead and shit like that. Kind of in the mid '90s. So I don't know. It's a subgenre of heavy metal music that came to prominence basically in the mid to late '90s to the mid 2000s. I mean, basically, the unfortunate thing is a lot of people still think that is a lot of what metal is what is new metal. So basically, that's it. So I mean, the main concern I have with regards to new metal is that people often assume that I'm a fan of the style of metal, or when they talk about metal in general, they mention bands included in the genre. I still believe that new metal is a form of metal. I know that's a highly contentious point with many people, but I do think that it's necessary to dispel a few notions people have about my relationship with the genre, and also what my opinion in its relation to the history of metal in general. So, why do this video? This video is kind of a video version of a essay I have on my metal blog that I wrote on September 6th of last year. And basically what kind of sparked that is just over the years people have these misconceptions of what metal is and what type of metal I like. I'll give you an example. So I'm really a fan of Manowar. And so I used to have a ringtone on my phone of All Men Play on 10, which is a song by Manowar from their fourth album, which is Sign of the Hammer, which actually I have a tattoo of, by the way, of the symbol. So it has high vocals, it's like, ah, it's like a high vocal song. And so it starts playing, All Men Play on 10. And so my friend is like, oh, nice hair metal, nice hair metal song. It's like, fuck, And then, some of these same people are playing new metal stuff on the stereo or whatever. It's like, you don't really get it, do you? So I hate to sound like a metal elitist. So what's my history with new metal? Not a very healthy one. I used to make fun of it all the time and thought only like mainstream people who really don't know shit about metal in general liked it. I was kind of an elitist asshole in my younger days. I mean, some of my friends have been compared to some of the guys in High Fidelity, if you've ever seen that movie with John Cusack. And, I mean, some people do like some new metal bands that are pretty credible people. I mean, some people like Slipknot, and they're pretty in some bands like the band Hypocrisy. They've come out and said that they liked them, and some people like that are into some new metal. But a lot of what was happening when the new metal movement came about is that I was listening to bands from Europe that were in this magazine Metal Maniacs, which is it's not really totally underground, but it's not like a super mainstream either. It's kind of a middle underground or sort of mainstream underground, if that makes any sense. So, I mean, I was listening to a lot of stuff like from Emperor, Blind Guardian, these bands, just a lot of different kinds of bands that were coming out in the mid to late 90s as far as metal. That kind of ages me, but whatever, fuck you. I don't care. So, what had happened is that in school, there was this guy, I'm not going to mention who he really is, because who the fuck knows, but he was listening to bands like Fear Factory, Machine Head, Pantera, Downset, all these kinds of groove metal bands and stuff. So he's like, "Oh, I have this album by this band, Chord, man. They're pretty fucking heavy." And at the time, I was like, "Is it like Carcass or something?" You know, I didn't know who the hell it was. So I was listening to it. I was like, "It's kind of boring. I don't know." It's like, it's like, where's the riffs? You know, it's like listen to like Heartwork, or like even the album before that by Carcass, like, you know, it's like the riffs were not there. And you know, I like punk music that has simplistic riffs, but it has a lot of melodies. Or Black Flag, you know, where it's just there's riffs as a developed riff. So I think that was the first band I heard. I had heard Faith No More, which is really a big influence on a lot of that stuff. But it's like comparing diarrhea to a big shit that you take, you know, when you have like a steak or something. You know, I don't know. But I mean, I'm not saying Faith No More shit. I'm just saying it's like comparing a steak to like the worst McDonald's hamburger or something like that. So, do I think that new metal bands, as they call it, consider themselves metal? Well, that really depends on who you ask at the time. Like, I mean, there was like this headline where Godsmack, they said, we're hard rock and not metal. I'd rather have people say that they're not metal and just own up to it and, like, you know, say, well, we're not metal because we're not heavy enough or whatever. But I would consider it a kind of a side of metal. I'd consider it a subgenre of metal in a way. I know Metal Archives doesn't really consider it a genre of metal, but I don't really care what Metal Archives says. So, I mean, I do recall reading an interview of one of the guitarists in Korn in the 90s where they kind of disparaged metal. And they was like, yeah, we play in low B, but it's not like some Carcass or some shit. So I remember reading that, and it was kind of just stupid. And then, I mean, recall this was an era when Rob Halford was making such statements as metal is dead. And then now Korn says they were influenced by metal. But the impetus back then was they were trying to break from this tradition. And it was the era in the mainstream United States rock scene where wanky guitar solos were frowned upon, and then high, clean vocals were seen as hair metal, as my reference before. Even though now people understand what Iron Maiden and Judas Priest or even King Diamond is compared to like Poison or Warrant or whatever. They understand that now, but back then it's like it was all the same shit. They clumped it all together. So, I mean, even Metallica were saying, well, we're not metal. They have fucking metal in the name. They were saying, oh, we're just hard rock. And it was Lars Ulrich, of course. So I'm going to quote Jonathan Davis of Korn. There's a lot of closed-minded metal purists that would hate something because it's not true to metal or whatever, but Korn has never been a metal band, dude. We're not a metal band. I don't know. So I basically... so I guess, you know, I was saying that I hate new metal because of its simplicity, but it's not really about that. It's kind of the hooks are lacking. It's all about this angst. It's like this suburban. Basically, what new metal is whatever. It's kind of what you take groove metal and you refine that even further. And groove metal comes from thrash, by the way. You put some hip hop and rap influences in it, even if you don't rap. And a lot of the 90s rock bands that were coming out. I mean, Korn covered Pearl Jam, so I mean that kind of shows you where they're coming from. And then Nine Inch Nails and all this stuff. It's kind of 90s post-grunge, more of the Mixolydian mode in music theory. Not necessarily that, but, you know, a lot less of these like Phrygian modes or like this, you know, harmonic minor that metal kind of went towards, or even natural minor. A lot of the time they didn't use. It was more. It's less about that. I mean, there is some Phrygian in there, but, you know, it's very watered down. So you took a lot of this, you know, some industrial influences or industrial rock influences, and you kind of mixed it together with all this stuff, and that's where new metal came from. And there was this droning style of vocal melody that recalled Marilyn Manson rather than Rob Halford. Even, I mean, I could get confused by Jonathan Davis and Marilyn Manson at times. I mean, nobody could deny System of a Down, even Seven Dust, or even some Disturbed have some decent hooks. But the dumbing down of the riffing takes away a lot of nu metal's appeal to me in general. And I'd rather just listen to classic punk rock if I'm listening to more simplistic music. It has a less overly simplistic or a less overly slick production than nu metal. So what makes nu metal so different than other metal you like? This is really where the heart of it comes, and then what I'm trying to explain it. It's not the associated with rap music. I mean, there was this band called the Hardcore, CORPS, that were around in the early '90s. They were okay fusion of metal and rap, and then of course Body Count. I always liked them, even though they're kind of more crossover hardcore punk, hardcore metal crossover. And then I always thought I'm the Man was funny, so it has nothing to do with the rap in it. It's just the whininess. So the suburban angst that they get from grunge, but it's more false, and they mix it with this more, it's just this suburban angst. And I mean, nu metal in many ways was an acceptable way for kids in the '90s and the early 2000s, when metal was not cool, to still like something heavy without succumbing to metal's quote unquote cliches. Not only hair metal, but metal as a whole. So to rid metal of these cliches, it kind of cut out more aspects that made it really what metal is, and made it more relevant or urban or hip. That's nothing to do with the rap, as I said, or even some of the funk influences. I like Faith No More, and it's not. I mean, if Eminem did a metal band, it would be a lot more interesting and more intelligent than Fred Durst's fucking band. So you had bands taking away the guitar solos because they sounded too 80s, or high vocals too 80s, or even melodies that were too 80s because there were natural minor was used a lot. They kind of took away a lot of that and just simplified it. And traditional heavy metal music uses a few different keys and modes that contextualize it with a lot of other types of music, and I already mentioned that. So I mean, when you hear something that sounds 80s, it's because of the modes that are used. But if you listen to European metal, like let's say Sonata Arctica, to your average American fuck that doesn't know anything but death metal or nu metal, they're going to think this sounds like some 80s song, because they don't know about that history or the legacy of how metal was in the rest of the world. They just know about how metal died and then went to grunge, then went to industrial rock became popular. I'm a big Nine Inch Nails fan, I might mention. And then it went to nu metal. And that it really didn't, and then there's a lot of the anthemic qualities that AOR, ironically, I'm getting into a lot of AOR lately, or even like a lot of melodic punk bands have, that power metal bands have, and nu metal was missing. It was more about my girlfriend dumped me and I hate myself, but like done in this like almost like this jock frat boy way. I fucking hate you! Blah, blah. Just all this shit. It's like punk rock did it right back in the day with that kind of stuff. But this is like this just cheesy, watered-down, whiny version. So there was a lot of dissonant chords used in nu metal too, but they did it in this way that was just stupid and obvious. It's not like the Swans or Godflesh or Voivod or Martyr. And, even Ministry or Helmet, as minimal as they can get riff-wise, they did it in this way. Those bands did it in a way that I like, that it wasn't like these nu metal bands. And then you add this pop element, weird, whiny pop, post-grunge thing to it. Like, Nickelback songs, and then you play like some of these songs like Stained was considered nu metal. It's like, what is the difference? Sounds like this like grungy kind of thing with the melodies and shit. So basically, I don't have to really say much more about this. basically this video is just about how I hated nu metal, and I do this to this day, what they call nu metal, and nu metal really represents to me the nadir of the death of metal in America in a lot of ways. It was almost metal died and became undead, but in a bad way. So I'm glad the whole revolution is over of nu metal. Now, there are bands that kind of mix some of these subgenres of metal with some nu metal influences, these newer subgenres. Now, one of the questions I get often from people is, well, or they try to say, why do you like metalcore? And why do you hate nu metal if you like metalcore? I don't really like metalcore that much, but I just have to sum it up as that, let's think about a band like Trapped, okay? So that's what you get, like the worst nu metal band. And you get Attack Attack, which is probably the worst, one of the worst bands I've seen, at least some of the songs I've seen, videos of them, it's just terrible. But you don't have anything in nu metal like Between the Buried and Me, or Protest the Hero, or, you know, even some of these other bands are kind of straddle line, or like the gent bands, even Periphery, which I don't like the vocals of that much. You know, you compare the musicianship of them to like fucking Linkin Park, and it's just miles above it, and it's enjoyable to listen to. Some parts, some of the metalcore stuff, the vocals deter from it. I don't like the way that they do the growling, or they call it screaming nowadays. Back when I was a kid, they called it growling. But when they do that in the metalcore, it's like it sounds more whiny, and it's kind of more related to the old like hardcore punk, but not in a good way. And it's almost more like nu metal. So I don't like a lot of the vocals of metalcore, but when they do it right, it's actually not too bad. As far as the riffing goes, it's very derived from a movement of metal that I liked, is that Swedish melodic death metal, like In Flames, At the Gates, all the old stuff is what I'm talking about from the 90s. So it's related to that a lot, so I really like those riffs. And if I hear something familiar in metalcore, it's like, hey, that's not half bad. I kind of like it. And one of the biggest things about metalcore that killed the old nu metal shit with is that people can fucking play guitar again. I'm not the best guitarist in the world or anything, but some of the fucking nu metal riffs are so badly played and just in this way that, you know, anybody can fucking play them. And the soloing and some of the shredding and some of the riffs from these metalcore bands just slaughter